Hi, and welcome back to Scruffy Tales. I'm sorry, my cold refuses to give up, but we'll give this a shot anyway. We're gonna take a strategical look at what's going on down in Ukraine, and this will be for the 28th of June. As you can see, I started work on this on the 26th, continued with it yesterday on the 27th, ended up recording now on the 28th. Work, family life, everything else gets in the way. So some maps are not up to date by the 28th, but nothing significant has happened, so it won't change what I think overall might be going on, where the troops are heading and so on. Right, so the strategical map, get the marker going, and then we're gonna start up in the north, where the Russians are attacking, marked here with red, Kupiansk, and out of Crimea. Next, yellow areas are what I think are diversions to force Russia to allocate lots of manpower and thereby weakening their other front lines. Two blue markers here, two blue regions where we know for sure that Ukraine is making big gains trying to push into occupied territory. Green is a theory of mine, and purple I think are linked if they are to be able to succeed in the long run. Right, so we're gonna start off with the strategical overview for the northern front line, what I call the Russian gambit. And it's located up here in the far north, right on the edge of the front line, right next to the border to Russia. So here we have, we can see three operations ongoing from the Russians up in the north, where they're pushing towards Kupiansk. There's a small patch of woodlands there they're trying to advance through. Svatove. They've been attacking out of Svatove for the entire year, making no headway at all. And down south, out of Crimea, we're trying to move into the forests on the edge of the river to the south there. So if we start with the northern operation aimed at Kupiansk, we can see that they are heading south, trying to push south. There's also a important bridge slightly to the north of the main Russian push that may or may not be in Russian control. Getting a couple of sketchy reports if they've actually crossed the river. And what is of importance up here? Well, rivers obviously crossing the bridges crossing the river. Sorry, and a Ukrainian supply route leading to the Svatove front line. And if Russia manages to cut that supply route, well, then the Russians attacking out of Svatove will obviously have a greater chance of success pushing into Ukrainian territory. And here's a bit how my mind works. Okay, so we know the Russians are attacking in the north, we know they're attacking in the middle out of Svatove. Why? Why are they doing this? Well, it's not unthinkable to assume that they will try and link up, which means a pincer move, one from the north and then the one in the middle going northward from the south, right? So these two operations are most likely linked in that they will encircle Ukrainian troops by pushing for the river and the lakes and capturing as many bridges as possible. And if we look at the operation to the south out of Crimea, they are trying to push hard into the woods. And the reason is most likely because they want to avoid the vast open farmlands where they are easy targets. So attacking through the woods and reaching towns on the edge of the woods to the west there where the small river is, and then push up north using the river as a barrier to secure what they have gained, and so they can hold on to it. And then the question is, okay, so they made moves in the north, they made moves in the south here along this front line within the boundaries of a large river. Well, again, it's not unreasonable to imagine that the Russians in the north and the Russians in the south will try and link up following the river, grabbing as many bridges as possible along the way. And so this is probably what they're after strategically. So these three operations combined will try and reach the strategical goal of securing all the territory east of the big main river. And if you take a look far south here of the map, you can see I've marked a section of the river. That is a bridge, a large bridge crossing the main river, allowing Russia to push southward. Oh yeah, one last thing. Why Russia is attacking up here is, well, they have access to a lot of logistics. If you remember, it wasn't that far from the Russian border. You can see it in the top of the map here. So it's easy for Russia to just pile in resources to this area, to Crimea, to Svatove, to into the north of Kupiansk, and make this push where they have easy access to manpower, easy access to resources, and also it's on the far flank, far away from the main Ukrainian counter-offensive. So what are the implications if Russia achieves with what I've just outlined here? Well, if we take a look at the south here of the right next to the Crimea operation, we can see the bridge I was talking about heading south, and if Russia pushes across it, they can push north from the Solidar region and encircle a lot of Ukrainian troops in the Siversk area, which would be a huge win for Russia, obviously. And they can also move in behind the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk and cut off supplies to those cities as well. And quite possibly in the long run even encircle them and potentially try and conquer them. So if Russia manages to push out to this large river here in the south, that could be a dangerous situation for Ukraine. And taking a look at the larger map, you can see where I've outlined the river that Russia is trying to reach. And as you can tell, that's a lot of territory that Russia could potentially gain control over, just because they are exploiting Ukraine's main assault to the south. So they're counterattacking in the north, far away from Ukrainian reinforcements, far away from Ukrainian resupplies, where Russia has an easier time bringing their own manpower, own reinforcements, own resources to push into a potentially weak Ukrainian section of the front line. So what is the Russian gambit in the north? Well, outlined it a couple of points here. Russia realized Ukraine would attack in the south. Russia planned to lock the main Ukrainian force in combat in the south. And exploiting this, Russia planned to counterattack in the north, far away from Ukrainian reinforcements. Russian logistics favors a battle in the north over the south. And if they're successful, great territorial gains that are easily defended. Remember that big river, that's partially also a massive lake. Encircle Ukrainian troops north of Bakhmut in the Siversk region if they cross the important bridge at Sativka. and secure their hold on Bakhmut as a consequence of taking Siversk, and in the long run threaten Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. So yeah, it's not on a whim that Russia is attacking up in the north, if you ask me. All right, moving on to the central front line: diversions, propaganda, and attrition. Located here, marked in yellow, three main regions where combat is taking place. And the big thing going on down here is obviously Russia defending Bakhmut from Ukrainian advances, and Ukraine has made massive headway around Bakhmut, over 4 kilometers to the south of it, and which appears to be an attempt to encircle Bakhmut, which would be favorable considering the casualty rates of Russia trying to assault the city head on. But I think this is primarily a diversion, even though the secondary goal is to actually push through and achieve the objective of encircling Bakhmut. But the main goal is to force Russia to allocate troops to Bakhmut, because it took Russia 6 months and incredible losses and casualty rates to conquer Bakhmut. And for Russia to lose Bakhmut in a week, 2, or a month is the worst kind of propaganda imaginable. So Russia will just send in all the troops they can in order to hold Bakhmut, which makes, and I think Ukraine knows this, which makes this operation almost impossible to achieve. And that is why I think this is mainly a diversion to force Russia to send in troops here instead of sending those troops elsewhere. So primarily Ukraine is trying to force Russia to send in troops to Bakhmut, knowing it will be a hard fight for Ukraine, and with the intention of weakening other sections of the front line by doing this. And if they are lucky enough to actually get through Russian defenses, get through Russian forces, then of course they will surround Bakhmut when possible and try and liberate the city itself. But that is not the main goal here. I think they know Russia will be sending in more and more troops to this location for propaganda purposes. They will not lose Bakhmut, and that will make it easier to achieve other goals along the front line. And going down to Donetsk and the 2 main assaults by Ukraine down here is also a reason why I think this section of the front line is a diversion. Because what are they doing other than liberating territory? What are they doing? What can they gain? They're going to try and surround Donetsk. That's a huge city, a fortified city. And the lines between Donetsk and Horlivka are fortified as well. What can they do apart from forcing Russia to send in more troops in order to hold a vital city like Donetsk? Because Donetsk is vital. It's a regional capital, and losing it would be a massive propaganda loss, just as losing Bakhmut. So that's why I think Ukraine is just applying pressure here to force Russia to send in troops to this region, to force them to send in ammunition, food, supplies, medicine, stuff, and everything. That would have been much more needed elsewhere along the front line. And you can see here I've marked a red circle. I want to highlight that in this area around Donetsk, it's a lot of give and take. Ukraine gains 500 meters, Russia gains 800 meters, stuff like that. So you might see on Twitter that, yeah, Ukraine took a field 500 meters wide. Yeah, Russia just took a field 800 meters wide. So down here, give and take, things are happening, they're fighting. But I think, sorry, that overall there's no real apparent goal for attacking down here other than liberating territory. So this is why I think this is also a diversion to force Russia to send in troops that could have been sent to Bakhmut, for instance. And by sending, oh, shutting down, going back up, and yeah. So and by sending troops to Bakhmut, they're forcing them to send troops to Bakhmut instead of going to Kremina, for instance, and similar places. And yeah, so that's about it. So diversions, propaganda, and attrition. Diversion's main goal is to tie up enemy forces. Secondary goal, if they push through enemy lines, is to secure territory or objectives. Propaganda. Bakhmut is vital for propaganda purposes. Russia will allocate significant forces to ensure it is not lost after 6 months of hard fighting trying to secure the city. And attrition. Forcing Russia to deploy troops to the fight, Ukraine intends to, over time, grind down Russian forces, thereby weakening Russia's efforts along the entire front line. And moving on to the southern front line, thunder runs, logistics, and breakthroughs. And the southern front is located here on the strategical map. And it is where Ukraine is currently trying its main push south to break through the Russian lines. And here you have it. Big Ukrainian push at Velika Novosilka, gaining a lot of territory. And the reason for this is that there's a road, a large highway heading from Velika Novosilka all the way down south to the sea. And so this road is extremely vital. That is why they're fighting over there. Like I said before, the green area is a theory of mine, which involves Polowy. Then we have Orkiv. Here, Ukraine has made gains south into Russian territory towards the town of Robotyne, which many people believe is a intentional push by Ukraine towards Tokmak. And then we have, of course, all the way to the west here on the map, right next to the dam, the push towards Vasilivka, and which I previously thought was a diversion to make it a bit easier for Ukraine in the other with the other operations. But now with Ukraine crossing the Kherson, it might actually be a proper push, but it's not as easy as it sounds, so we'll return to that a bit later on. And we're starting off with an operational overview of Velika Novosilka, the Ukrainian Thunder Blitz. Right, so Velika Novosilka and the operation surrounding that town and the road is located here. We have a operational overview, and I've marked Makarivka and Urushaine. There's also a town right next to Urushaine called Staromayorske, which is the front line along the main highway there that I've marked, heading south. And lately we've heard that Ukraine has pushed up towards Rivnopil and liberated this village. It's like 20 buildings or something. It's a small farming village, farming community. And the reason for this is Ukraine is interested in taking the high ground here. And the reason is simple. If you gain access to this territory and can push south, as I've marked with the arrows, you can start outflanking Russian positions and firing at them from the high ground. And by so doing, you increase the chances of gaining control of these two important highways heading south and bypassing Russian defenses before you reach the main Russian defensive line. Here you have a topography map. You have Makarivka and Staramayorske, and Urushaina is marked as well, and Rivnapil that was so recently liberated. And as you can tell, the red is high ground, blue is valley, the river, and all the towns. So as you can see, it's vital to gaining access to Rivnapil, and not Rivnapil, but the surrounding area, this massive hill. And Ukraine needs this hill in order to move around the defensives that Russia has put up between Staramayorsk and Marakivka. And here we have the Russian defensive line, the main one, and I marked with a blue line where Ukraine is currently in control. And as you can see, if they push down the high ground between Staramayorsk, Remivka, and so on, sorry for that, then they're in a great position to outmaneuver a lot of Russian towns before they have to move in and punch through the main Russian defensive line, which will be something else. But they have to breach here in this area because, as you can see, I've marked Klitschove and the towns south of it, Herivka, Yalinske, Novopetrivka. These towns are right on this vital highway heading south that Ukraine needs in order to punch through deep into occupied territory in a thunder run. So what is a thunder run? Well, it's basically once you get through enemy lines, you go as deep as possible towards certain objectives in order to secure them: villages, towns, hills, bridges, railroad hubs, and so on. And you deep into it. It's not a wide push; it's a narrow push. The trick is to not go too deep, so you lose control and can get cut off and surrounded and so on. But they have to go as deep as possible along this highway that I marked. And if they pull that off, then Russia will have to obviously adjust to the enemy being located deep in occupied territory, deep behind Russian lines. And that could potentially force Russia to just pull back the entire defensive line. And Ukraine could, with a bit of luck, gain substantial territory as a consequence. So the Ukrainian Thunder Blitz. Ukraine will probably secure the highway T0518, where it runs south through the Russian main defensive line, eventually. And the goal is to reach as far south as possible with a thunder run, to establish a staging point for the last push towards the Azov Sea. Blitzkrieg. After breaching the Russian main defensive line, Ukraine will probably try and encircle Russian forces in order to cut them off from supplies and reinforcements. As each pocket of Russian resistance is defeated, the breach through the main defensive line grows wider, and then you can move through even more troops and supplies. Moving on to the operational overview for Poloi. This is my theory, and I'll show you why I think it holds some merit. And the tagline here is "Logistics wins wars." And this operation includes the green area that I marked, and also the Orikhiv push into Russian territory, and I will tell you why. Robotny and Tokmak is located in the direction of the see-through arrow, right? That it's actually the Robotny is right on the edge there of the where Russian and Ukrainian lines meet, and further south along that road you have Tokmak. But over the last couple of days, we've seen Ukraine attacking eastward along the highway, along the railroad. It could be to surround Robotny, obviously. It could also be to widen the front along where they have managed to pierce Russian lines so they don't get encircled. But since we also have some gains north of Polowy. If you combine that with the gains they made west of Polowy, gains that are moving towards Polowy, it almost seems as if Ukraine is actually making a push towards Polowy. And why is that? Well, take a look. These thicker gray lines, that's railroads. Those are railroads. So Polowy is a big railroad hub. And from Polowy, sorry, you have lots and lots of highways, lots and lots of smaller roads spreading out into a vast network where you can move logistical trucks. And look at this. Downtown Polowy. This is right smack in the center of town. This huge railroad hub. Take a look at it. It's a, like I said in a previous video, it's a logistical wet dream. And it's not difficult to imagine how Ukraine could use this to bring in vast amounts of supplies and equipment, and even to ship damaged vehicles out along the railroad to being repaired further back from the front line. I mean, this train station or railroad hub right smack in the center of Polowy is just incredibly vital for the Ukrainian war effort. So I marked railroads with black arrows and Ukrainian moves with blue arrows. And as you can see, they appear to be moving straight for Polowy. And if you gain access to Polowy, yes, Ukraine can move in so much equipment. But if they, and from Polowy, they can then push out and use it as a forward base of operations to continue their advances into Russian occupied territory. So essentially, Polowy would become the Ukrainian version of Tokmak. As you can tell, Russia is bringing in all troops, all supplies, all equipment by rail to Tokmak, and from Tokmak they then ship it out along the roads by truck and what have you to the front line. And Ukraine doesn't have anything like that close to the front line, which is why it makes sense for them to try and get to Polowy, because then they can just ship in vast amount of equipment, weaponry, vehicles, reinforcements, and use Polowy as a forward base of operations. And from there, relying on the, I have no clue what just fell down, relying on the road network to ship everything out by truck and what have you to the front line and push further deeper into the occupied territories and liberate more towns and more areas. And I think this is more important for Ukraine than making a push towards Tokmak. At the moment, I should add. I think they're going to grab Polowy first, and once they have that forward base of operations, then they can start thinking about moving on Tokmak and denying Russia that vital logistical hub. What's also interesting is if you take a look to the south here of Polowy, you find Chernivka, and right outside of Chernivka you have another railway hub. And if Ukraine can grab that, well, then they can make another forward base of operations where they can just send in troops and supplies and just keep pushing deeper still into occupied territories and liberating more of the country. And also, if we take a look at the Russian defensive line, the main defensive line, you can tell that over by Robotyne and Tokmak, Russian defenses are, well, they're well made. It's going to be one hell of a fight trying to get through all of that. Meanwhile, over at Polowy, sure, Polowy is a city or a town, and those are fortifications in their own right. But the defensive lines surrounding it, outside of it, are nowhere near as extensive as those over at Robotyne, which means theoretically it's easier to punch through the Russian lines over at Polowy and gaining access to the city than it is to punch through at Robotyne and then trying to get through the next line and the next line and then the next line before you're trying to punch through the defensive lines surrounding Tokmak, right? So this is why I think Ukraine is more than likely after Polowy instead of Robotyne and Tokmak at present. So, logistics wins wars. Tokmak is an important logistical hub for the Russians. Close to the front line, it is easy to bring in supplies by train and ship it out with trucks. Polowy, Ukraine doesn't have a large logistical hub close to the front line. And by taking Polowy, Ukraine could create a staging point from which they could liberate occupied territories in the south. All right, moving over to the operational overview of Vasilivka and Kherson. So, tagline, catch you on the flip side. And these are the purple markers on the map. In the top right corner, we have the Ukrainian push towards Vasilivka, and down in the left, to the left, we have the Ukrainian push across the Antonov Bridge at Kherson. And we're starting off with Vasilivka. And what I think the point of this push is to follow the dam to get behind Russian defenses, which will not be easy, by the way, and then secure the stretch of land between the dam and that lake or bay south of Melitopol. They're not after Melitopol itself. There's no point in getting stuck in a massive city like that. That would take months and months and months to fight their way through. They want to get the territory outside of the city. And if they gain access to this land and can occupy it, they essentially cut off Russian supplies from the west. As you can see, the crosses here are blocking roads that Russia can use to get supplies and troops to the front line up around Robotyne and Polowy and so on. There's just one slight problem here, and as you can see, Russia does not want this to happen. They have actually built all their defenses in the north here to prevent Ukraine from getting in behind Melitopol, from getting in to secure the landmass between the dam and the bay area. As you can see, there's even a highway going straight from Melitopol north to the front line, and Russia ignores it. They've chosen to fortify the logistical route to Tokmak, between Melitopol and Tokmak instead. But the highway leading straight from the front line to the city of Melitopol, not a single defensive trench work along it. Russia has focused on defending the roads and the pathway leading in behind the Russian logistical network. So all these important railroads and highways can be cut off by Ukraine. So Ukraine can't cut them off, I mean. And so pushing in the north here this is why I thought this was a diversion to begin with, because it would force Russia to allocate troops to this area, even though it is so heavily fortified. So it would force them to move in troops here, lock those troops in place, meaning it's a little bit more easier to attack in other places. But how Ukraine intends to pull this one off, I don't know. It might still be a diversion, to be honest. But I think, as does Russia, that It's the land mass between the dam and the bay area that is important, and even more important than Tokmak. Take a look at this. If you break through, you can just drive all the way up to Tokmak. Nothing in the way. But Russia is focused on defending the territory between the dam and the bay. Yeah, so I don't think Ukraine will push through here. It's too heavily defended, but we'll see. And moving on to the other operation over by the Antonov Bridge, where we are getting reports that Ukraine has gained a foothold on the Russian side of the river. A bit unclear as of yet what's going on, but it appears that Ukraine has made a push and established a foothold. If this is a recon in force, if this is a feint to trick Russia to allocate more troops over here to make it easier to punch through at other places, who knows? But this is what we're being told. Ukraine has crossed the river and secured a bridgehead, as it were, on the south end of the river on the Russian-held territory. And what does this mean in the greater scheme of things? Well, it means that Ukraine potentially can move down to cut off Russian forces from Crimea. I mean, why else attack here in this part of the country? There's literally no other reason to attack across the Dnieper River other than to try and cut Russia off from Crimea. So they will probably get across, secure territory. This won't be done in a couple of days, by the way. This will take weeks, possibly even months. So yeah, this is not a fast war. Wars historically aren't fast, by the way. They tend to go on for years, if anyone missed that little fact. So they will try and push down towards Crimea and secure the territory along the blue lines here. And the reason is, again, logistics. Take a look at all the lines here. Railroads, highways, and smaller roads, and what have you. Ukraine wants to move down to Crimea and cut off these 2 points where I've marked with X's, because these are the 2 points where Russia can move in troops and reinforcements from Crimea. If Ukraine secures these 2 land routes, Russia is essentially cut off from reinforcements in the south altogether. Which is why it's a big deal that Ukraine has crossed the bridge here and gained a foothold on the southern end of the river. I'm guessing Russia won't allow this to happen, so they will be piling in troops to protect these 2 very vital logistical routes in order to hold Ukraine at bay, which could benefit Ukrainian troops elsewhere along the front line. So, catch you on the flip side. Vasilivka, heavily fortified region to prevent Ukraine from reaching vital stretch of land. Russia will reinforce here to protect vital logistical routes, weakening other locations such as the Antonov Bridge. Difficult for Ukraine to secure objectives here, most likely a diversion to force Russia to allocate troops to the area. We'll see if that's true or not. Kherson, weak Russian flank. When they blew the dam, they moved most of their troops up to Vasilivka and other parts of the front line. Kherson allows Ukraine to strike at extremely vital Russian logistics out of Crimea. When Russia allocates troops to counter the crossing, it could allow other fronts to push through Russian lines, such as at Vasilivka. So what does it all add up to? What are the strategical goals for Ukraine in the south with thunder runs, logistics and breakthroughs? Well, potentially something like this. The thunder run hopes to reach the Azov Sea and cut off Russians in the south from friendlies in the Donbass area. By crossing Kherson, Ukraine can move in and cut off the Russians in the south from Crimea. And if you grab the territory between the dam and Melitopol and the Bay Area, then you split the Russian forces in half. Encircle them. They are without supplies, they are without reinforcements. And now Ukraine can begin to grind them down piecemeal. And in doing this, Polowy will be vital, important, because from it they can now start pushing out towards liberating the south. So, Ukraine's strategical goals in the south. Thunderblitz, reach the Azov Sea and cut off the Russians from any help from the east. Logistics, secure Polowy and build up a fortified forward base of operations. Split the Russians, securing the stretch of land between the dam and the sea, cutting the Russians in half. The flip side, by attacking from Kherson and crossing the river, Ukraine can cut the Russians off from Crimea. That's the end of this extreme Armchair General video. Cringe levels are off the charts. Turned this shit up to 11, didn't I? And if you stuck with me, thank you. And hope you found it interesting. And I'll see you in the next one.